So, first off, I just want to welcome you on the podcast and say it is very awesome and amazing that you're on here, and we're very happy to see you today. Jaden will be starting off with the questions.
We just wanted to know a little bit about your background, like where'd you grow up and what'd you do when you were younger?
Be happy to answer that, Jaden, but can y'all tell me a little bit about yourselves first?
Yeah, of course. I'm Jaden Robinson. I'm in the 8th grade. I attend Northern Middle School, and I'm a part of Good Trouble Youth with Josie.
And I am Josie Dial. I am one of the youth leaders at Good Trouble, Maryland, and I'm an 11th grader in high school.
Wonderful. Well, thank both of you for the opportunity to share some views and to hopefully depart some information that you might find useful. Jaden, your question was, where did I grow up at?
Yes, sir.
The term they use here is native Annapolitan. All that means is I lived in Annapolis, Maryland most of my life. However, I grew up on a farm in a place called Davidsonville, Maryland, which is just outside of Annapolis, maybe 10 miles outside of Annapolis. And I attended public and private schools here in Anne Arundel County, and I have a master's degree in human services from Lincoln University.
Awesome. What have you done? Like what did you do when you were like a child or as a kid?
What would you consider a kid? 10 and under? 10 and 14?
Teenager.
Okay. As a teenager, I went to a school called Annapolis High School. I was 15 years old. And I read a book called The Autobiography of Malcolm X. And that particular book, we were required in the 10th grade to read 2 chapters and then give an oral report. And I think I might have been a C student. I really was not inspired by school. So I go and read the Autobiography of Malcolm X, and although we were supposed to read 2 chapters, I was going to wing it, just read a couple pages and get up and make this presentation the next day. I picked up the Autobiography of Malcolm X, and on the cover of that particular book, it said, "I don't expect to live long enough to see this in its final form." And I thought that was such a powerful statement. I'd never heard of Malcolm X. So I picked up the Autobiography of Malcolm X and literally couldn't put it down. I read the book in one day, in one setting. It had such a tremendous impact on me. So when I went to school the next day, I was just really enthusiastic in wanting to tell the class about what I had read about Malcolm X. And so that book had a profound impact on me. And as a result of reading that book, everything I could find that had anything to do with African Americans, I read. I read all of Malcolm X's speeches, later would read a lot of Dr. King's speeches, but anything that had anything to do with the history of people of color in this country, I read. And it changed me. It changed my whole perspective on everything. Probably one of the best examples I can give you is when I read these following words in the Autobiography of Malcolm X. Malcolm, as you may know, was in prison, and he was talking to a white man who was a chaplain who was helping these inmates get a better understanding of religion. And Malcolm X had done a lot of writing and reading and researching. And he asked a question of this white preacher that I'd never heard anyone ask before. And it so impacted, his answer so impacted on me, it really changed me. And the question he asked, Malcolm X asked this white man, if Jesus, he said, was born in Bethlehem, and if Bethlehem is where what we call Palestine or the Middle East, wasn't Jesus a black man? He asked. And I'd never had anybody ever ask that question, what color Jesus was. And at home, my parents would have photos of Jesus, but they were all photos of white men. I'd never heard anybody talk about Jesus might be Black. And then in autobiography, the man that Malcolm X asked this question to did not say that Jesus was not a white man, but he wouldn't concede he was a Black man. So he said he was a brown man. And Malcolm X said that was enough for him to do his own research. And as a result of that, that changed my whole perspective on life.
And one more question for me, and I think I'll hand it over to Josie. Did you always want to be a political organizer?
No, in fact, yeah, I don't know how much you know, but I used to be not only a political organizer, but I served on the city council. I've done some extensive traveling. But no, I initially did not want to be a community activist, didn't want to be involved in civil rights, frankly. But as a result of reading the autobiography of Malcolm X at a very young age, I was only 14 or 15 at the time, I got very, very involved in the civil rights movement at a very, very early age. By the time I was 15 years old or 16 years old, I led the demonstration at my high school. Jazzy, like you, I wasn't in 11th grade, I was in the 10th grade at the time. And I just finished reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated in 1968. So this is like in 1969, when I was in high school. And when you went to Annapolis High School, which was then an integrated school, there were about 1,500 students, white and Black, with Blacks making up about a third of the population. And where we used to have assemblies at, the hall was not big enough for everyone to be in the assembly. So they would break us up in sections, 500 students at a time. So we went into a assembly. This was in November, I believe, of 1969. And on the stage were all white people. The school board, the school student government president was white. The principal was white. The administrators were white. The cheerleaders were white. It was just full of whites on the stage. So they started playing some music, and the music they were playing was country and Western music. And one of the students, Black students, were in this assembly room. The lights are turned down real low. And so when they put this white band on and started playing country and Western music, one of the Black students shouted out, "We want to hear some soul music." And it was so loud that everybody on the stage heard him. So the student government president put his hands up to tell them to stop playing the music. He did not know who in the audience had said they want to hear some soul music, but his response was the following: "This is our assembly. This is our program. And if you don't like it, you can leave." And when he shouted that into the microphone, there was just complete silence. And then I thought of what he had just said. It took me about 20 seconds. He said, "If you don't like it, leave." So I got up to leave. And in those days, when you got up, the seats flapped up as you were leaving. So I got up to leave. And as I was walking out, I suddenly heard flap, 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 flap. And before you know it, 150 Black students had walked out of that assembly. And that was my first experience with a protest. And after we came out of the assembly room, we gathered at the flagpole, which was near the building, the opening of the building. And then someone says, "Well, what are we going to do now that we've walked out of this class?" And the group decided that from that moment on, until they provided us with a Black history program, more Black music, we wanted a more diverse student curriculum, we were going to boycott classes. And we said we would not go back to classes until they gave into some of our demands. And so for 2 weeks, we would go to school every day, but instead of going into the classroom, we would go down to the cafeteria and we would have somebody speak to the students, generally another student, and we talk about the various Black history stuff that we had learned and talked about various persons. And that went on for 2 weeks. And that was the start of my civic involvement with the community. So we stayed out of class for 2 weeks, and these leaders from the community, Black and white, came to the school to convince us to go back to class. And they had the president of the NAACP, they had the mayor of Annapolis at the time, they had several religious people, as well as other community leaders. And remember, our ages are like 15, 16 years of age. And so we refused to go back to class. And of course, it got a lot of attention by the media. So after boycotting classes for 2 weeks, these adults came in and tried to convince us to go back to class. And every time they got up to say why we'd go back to class, none of the students would move. So finally, a man who was with the NAACP came to the group and he was speaking. And he said, if you give us 30 days, just 30 days, we'll solve, we'll get you the Black curriculum program. We'll get you more Black teachers. We'll meet some of your demands. And the students said, no. 1 month is too long. So then he said, well, give us 3 weeks. And again, the students all booed and said 3 weeks were too long. Finally, he said 2 weeks. And students again booed and said, no, that's too long. But the more I thought of it, I said, if we can get all this stuff in 2 weeks, that seemed to be more than reasonable. So I got up and spoke to the group and said, if we can have all this in 2 weeks, we should go back to class. Well, the students followed my advice and we all went back to class. And we didn't know it until we were in class for 2 weeks that the administrators and those people who had promised us they were going to do all these programs, they lied to us. They didn't do anything. What they did do was bring police who would be in the hallways serving as monitors. So if you left your classroom, they'd make you go back to the classroom, et cetera. So after weeks of the school system not keeping its promise, we had a meeting with about 10 people off campus, students, and decided we were going to call for a boycott. And the boycott was going to be on February 12th, which was Abraham Lincoln's birthday. So after voting to do this boycott, in the old days, they used to have what you call mimeograph machines in order to run off flyers. And we had to do these leaflets. So one of the young women who was part of this effort worked in the office, and her job was to develop this flyer that would tell people, do not come to class on February 12th, which by the way was the very next day. We were going to distribute them in the neighborhood once she ran them off. But before she could run off a single flyer, an administrator caught her in the act, confiscated the flyer, read what it was saying, and gave it to the principal. The principal thought that we had already had these flyers and they were already being distributed among the students. He didn't know that he had the only flyer that existed. So he got on the public address system, not knowing that he had the only flyer, and said, I have a flyer that's calling for a demonstration tomorrow. If any student participate in this demonstration, they will be suspended and or expelled. He had just informed all 1,500 students of a demonstration that they didn't even know about. And in those days, if you told students that they couldn't do something, they did the opposite. So the next day, 150 students protested and wouldn't go to class. And it escalated into what they call a melee. And they called the police to handle the students. And out of that melee, 15 students got expelled from the high school. And I was one of the students, which is why I wound up going to a private school as opposed to a public school.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So on the topic of students and the youth, why do you think it's important for the youth to stay informed about the impacts and issues that impacts the well-being?
I'm gonna give you two examples that you both should be able to relate to. You each have, I presume, a cell phone that you can Google something, right?
Yeah.
If I told you that the ninth president of the United States was a man named Martin Van Buren, that wouldn't be hard for you to believe, right? White man, ninth president of the United States. You'd probably say, yeah, well, yeah, Madison, you may not even heard of him, but Madison Van Buren was the ninth president of the United States. He had a United States senator who would later be vice president. His name is Richard Mentor Johnson. Richard Mentor Johnson. If you were to Google the name of his wife, which is Julie Chin, Chinn, you would discover that the ninth vice president of the United States was married to a Black woman who had two Black children by him, two Black daughters. And if you ask Jazzy or Jaden, any of your students, anybody you go to school with, if they ever heard of Julie Chin, they will tell you no. You've studied history, presumably since you've been in school. When you Google that name, you'll see that she was a Black woman married to the vice president of the United States. And both of you probably know that the current vice president of the United States is a Black woman who has a blended family, meaning that her husband's white and her daughter's her stepchildren are white. And most people think that she, meaning Vice President Harris, was the first vice president to have a blended family. It's just not true. It was the man I just told you, Richard Mentor Johnson. And if you Google that and find out that Julie Chin was his wife and that she had two daughters by him, you must ask yourself this question, Jaden. You're in the 8th grade, correct?
Sir.
And Jazzy said she's in 11th grade.
Yes.
Why do you think it is that neither one of you knew that?
Because we weren't taught.
Exactly. Now, here's another name, Josie. I hope one of you got this so you actually Google it so you can see. I'm going to give you the name of a Black man that I believe that neither one of you have heard of. This Black man freed more Black people than Abraham Lincoln. And most Black people have never heard of him. His name is Madison Washington. And after you Google Madison Washington, I have a question for you. After you take a moment to Google it, tell me when you have it up.
I just Googled him.
Okay. What year is this that Madison Washington freed these slaves?
1841.
What year did Abraham Lincoln issue his Emancipation Proclamation? It's 22 years later, it's 1863. So why is it this guy, Madison Washington, a Black man who really freed more Black people than Lincoln, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Why do you think people don't know who he is? Why don't people teach about him?
I think it's because, well, Abraham Lincoln is a white man, while Madison Washington is a Black man. And then plus, so making Abraham look like a white savior, plus not really teaching the true history of what happened during slavery.
Right. So do you see why it's important who controls the narrative, who tells the story? Because if you tell history and only tell his story, and you don't tell her story, and you don't tell our story, you only get one version of history. and that's his story. And so what we have to do is make sure that we supplement our learning and don't depend on the school system to teach us our history. So I hope both of you enjoy just kind of reading independently of what's given to you in the school system. And as you learn new information, that you will be inspired to dig more. Now, here's another question for you. When was Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated?
Was it March 4th, 1963?
No,
Was
April
it
4th.
April 4th.
Oh,
April 4th.
1968?
Right. Now, you ready for this question?
Yes.
When was Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother assassinated, and who assassinated her?
I don't know.
Jaden, did you know that Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother was assassinated?
No.
Well, here's what I want you to hear. Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother was assassinated 6 years after Dr. King. So Dr. King gets killed in 1968, April 4th. And on June 30th, 1974, Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother is assassinated. Now I want you both to Google Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother assassinated. And then look at the picture of the man who killed her and tell me what was his name and why did he kill him?
It says on June 30th, 1974, Alberta King was killed at 69 years young.
Who assassinated her? Who killed her?
Wayne Chainut.
Uh-huh. And who was he?
He was a 23-year-old black man.
That's right. That's what I wanted you to see. So Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother is killed. Martin Luther King Jr. rather is killed in 1968, and 6 years later, his mother is assassinated while playing the organ in a church in Atlanta on a Sunday morning. And her assassin happened to be a black man. And every student you run into, I guarantee you, if you ask them, did they know that Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother had been assassinated? They will say no. And if you ask them, did you know that it was a black man that killed her? They will be shocked to learn that. And the reason I bring that up to you is this is the kind of history that we need to make sure that all students learn, that people realize that Dr. King made a great sacrifice and his family paid a great price for it. Most people wouldn't think of Dr. King and they think of him as an individual, but he was part of a family, and the entire family was affected by the work he did. Any additional questions?
Sorry, I'm really shocked by that. And I'm a little confused on why Marcus Wayne would kill MLK's mother,
All right,
Alberta.
well, Jossie, do this. Google Martin Luther King Jr. stabbed 1957.
Yeah, he was stabbed by a woman. A black woman.
A black woman, right? There you go. 1957, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was what you're looking at? Doesn't it tell you the name of the black woman?
Is it Isola Ware?
That's correct. She stabbed Martin Luther King Jr. in 1957, and he gives a famous speech. And in that speech, he says, it's the last speech he gives. It's called, "I've Been to the Mountaintop." And one of the lines that Dr. King talks about is being stabbed by this demented black woman. And Dr. King said, had he sneezed, he would have died. That's how close the knife that she stuck in his chest, it was really a paper opener. It came so close that it came to his main artery, which is in his chest, near his heart. And had Dr. King sneezed in 1957, that speech, "I've been to the mountaintop, I have a dream," those speeches that he's famous for, you would have never heard because he would have died. And so that's why it's important that students know their history and learn everything they can about the heroes and sheroes.
I have one question for you. Well, actually, two questions for you. So, could you tell us a little bit more about the Caucus of African American Leaders, since you previously were talking about when you're in high school, you had sort of formed a group of Black students at your school?
Right. The Caucus of African American Leaders is relatively recent. Got started about 4 years. No, 7 years ago, 7 years ago. And it got started because a Black woman had gotten fired from a job in Anne Arundel County. She was the first Black woman to be a health officer for Anne Arundel County. And she got hired, and then she ran into all this racism when she was working for Anne Arundel County government. And the feeling was that she was forced to resign. And many members of the community came together to protest the way she was being treated. And what shocked the folks when these people came together was most of them didn't even know the woman. She was an African, would come to America and had become an American citizen. She was truly an African American. And her name was Angela Wakwea, Dr. Angela Wakwea. And the powers that be wanted to know, why would a community who didn't know Dr. Angela Wakwea be willing to come out and rallied around her? And the answer was, and is, that we created this Caucus of African American Leaders. If either one of you have ever been to a farm, you'll find there are two types of insects that you may run across. One is a bumblebee. A bumblebee generally exists on farms. And the other you will run into is a hornet. The hornet is smaller than the bumblebee. The hornet, however, is more deadly. And here's the reason why. If there are 10 bumblebees in a room, you can go to each one of those bumblebees and kill them individually. And while you're killing one bumblebee, the other bumblebees won't do a thing. And you can just literally kill one at a time. If you go to a hornet's nest and you put your hand on one hornet, every hornet in that nest will come at you. And hornets are respected because they act collectively. They act to defend one of their own to the death. And so what we wanted to do with this Caucus of African American Leaders is have it begin to behave like a hornets. When someone does something to one of our community unfairly, instead of having to deal with that one person, they would have to deal with everybody in the community. And that's the principle that the Caucus of African American Leaders work on. And Jazzy, you came to one of the meetings, you saw the number of people that showed up from the various walks of life. And you'll find among that group of lawyers, former police officers, firefighters, civil rights activists, business people, educators. And the idea is that we all make up the community. We're all part of this hornet's nest. And so we've been operating with that proposition.
I love that. How it's just like you said, you won't hurt one of us, you hurt all of us.
Can I add something to that? So with the hornet's nest, I feel like with that analogy, that can also be used in like a herd mentality, because I've seen this a lot these last couple of years, and I was just wondering how like people in our community can help stand up and get involved to help this inequality that we're facing. Us as in youth can stand up to help and get involved.
Right. And remember, the key word that I used is that when you're being treated unfairly, meaning somebody's doing something unjust to you, the community should rally to support one of its own. A herd mentality, when I think of herd mentality, is where somebody's doing something and a mob just kind of gathered together and it's really does it without any reason or rationale. That's not what's meant by the hornet analogy. The hornet analogy is very clear that if someone goes into a hornet's nest and attempt to injure any one of those hornets, they respond collectively as opposed to just the individual because they have a sense of community. And that's what we want to do. Now, obviously, when people do things that are illegal, criminal, wrong, you can't defend the indefensible. We're talking about supporting people who have been unjustly themselves violated.
I was wondering how as a youth could get more involved in the community to help with the inequality that we're facing.
In my opinion, one of the things that all students should do, particularly young people, is take advantage of the opportunities that they have that their foreparents did not have. Read, research. The information I gave to you earlier will not be given to you in a public or private school. You have to do your own research, and you will be absolutely amazed by the people historically that have come before us. These have been some amazing men and women who've done some incredible things, absolutely incredible. So the more you learn about our history, I think the more empowered you become, and you don't accept certain kinds of inequalities because you know your history, you know the law, and more importantly, you know yourself. It's very, very important that people understand who they are. And particularly when it comes to African-American students, we've got to do more research and learn more about our history. And once you learn more about your history, believe me, you will find how powerful it is.
Since you mentioned racism, I just want to move to the next question, which was, what does County Executive Stuart Pittman declaration that racism is a public health issue mean to you?
What I know, but for me, what it means is recognizing that racism is a sickness and an illness. If you think because someone's Black, they're automatically inferior to you, you have a serious problem. And it's generally one of a mental illness. You need help. To see some of the more brilliant people who happen to be Black exist, let's just use Dr. King since his image is in the background. How in the world can anybody in their right mind say that Dr. King was less than human or less than a white person? I mean, it just makes no sense. And if somebody really, really believed that, they have to be dealing with an illness. So that's what Stuart Pittman meant when he said that we should treat racism as a mental illness, because that's what it is.
Yeah, it's really, I really like what you said there, because it's sickening to think that someone so great can be diminished in their character because of everything that they did, no matter how much they do.
That's right.
Do you have anything you want to say to the audience? Any just broad statements, any general statements to everybody?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think the most important thing I want to stress is the importance of people understanding the person that tells the story, the narrative. It's important that people tell their own story and give their own narrative. If you ask the average person who's watching today's podcast this question, Why was Rosa Parks arrested? They will tell you, for the most part, that she was arrested because she refused to give up her seat to a white man. And that's why she was locked up. In 1984, I got to meet Rosa Parks. And I asked Mrs. Parks that same question. Why were you arrested? And what Mrs. Parks told me is not the same thing that most people have been told. Mrs. Parks said the reason she was arrested is because she refused to give up her dignity. That's much more powerful than somebody giving up a bus seat. And so it's important that we learn to tell our own stories, make sure we give that interpretation to that story. In the words of Malcolm X, if you don't do so, people will have you walking west when you should be going east. You've got to know what your history is. And only by knowing your history can you make a difference. So, Jaden, thank you very much for the opportunity to have this dialogue with you in Jersey.
No problem, sir. Thank you for your time in the interview.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a great evening.
You too, sir.
You as well.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
I think it was very interesting. A lot of what he was saying.
Yeah, I like the one with the school.
Yeah.
That was.
I kind of wish he told us like what happened after that. Like he kind of just said that, you know, people got expelled and he went to private school. But like, what did he do during private school then? Like, because I know in private school there's a lot of racism, probably more because like people are like thinking they're better than you because they're like at private school. Yeah. Yeah, I just thought like also why we don't really learn about Black history, especially during African enslavement all over the world, because it wasn't just the United States of America. It was Canada. It was happening in Mexico. It was happening in all the countries in South America. It was happening in Africa. And it was happening in the UK. I don't know about other places in Europe, but I know for sure it was happening in the United Kingdom. Oh, never mind. It was all of Europe because France had enslavement actually in France, not just like taking over islands. I think like the biggest reason why we don't really learn about it is because it's inspiring to Black people that we don't need a white person to save us. We can be our own liberators.
Yeah, and I really liked how you brought up like the white Jesus. Because it's like, why would Jesus be white?
Yeah.
Mary lived in Africa.
Oh yeah, and like how people are still settling with, like, because I was hearing this thing where a bunch of people, and it was like people from different races, so it wasn't just like a white person, wasn't just a Black person, but they were like, yeah, Jesus was a brown man. It was like, not really. He had brown skin, but he's Black, you know, he's in Africa. And they're like, he was in the Middle East. Okay, well, what part? Was he in the part that was closer to Asia or the part closer to Africa? Part closer to Africa. He's in Egypt. Egypt is in Africa. That is a Black man.
It's just like the little things, like the animations that are made for little kids to learn Jesus, the books that are drawn, the book illustrations that are made. White Jesus, like Jesus was never white. Like, why are we putting this image out there?
Because it's subliminal. I can't say it right, but messaging. They're saying it without saying the words. Yeah. And
they don't want to accept the fact that Jesus was the same tone that they called less than. They enslaved and
I think that's pretty interesting too, because the Bible was used to justify slavery.
Yeah.
You know? So, and it still is, and it's like justified. It's like used to justify so much hate, not just like slavery and racism, but also like homophobia and transphobia. It's just, it's crazy to me. And like how there are people who just don't want to accept that fact that it was, even though it's like, it's not an opinion, it really was used to justify it.
It is. Now that was a good talk. Like, I feel like the stories definitely carried that interview. Yeah, because me and Pops were having a conversation earlier about like how white people like keep saying like, what are you afraid of? Like what are white people really afraid of? Like, it's just like they were so frightened. Yeah.
They're afraid of the truth and realizing that what they've been told and what they're spewing out is false, it's a lie. And then I think they're also, that's like half of it. And then the other half, I feel like they're scared that we're going to do what they did to us. And they don't want that to happen because they know how terrible it truly was.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, we don't want to do that. We just want to be treated like human beings.
Yeah. We want equality and equity.
Yeah, like I'm thinking about school and how it's just very humiliating to be the only Black person in the class. And then they start arguing and debating about your human rights, your right to live, your right to have rights, you know?
Yeah, they can debate about something that you can never understand.
My class could have a debate about whether if Christopher Columbus was a hero or villain. First off, red flag. That's the first red flag. This is racially traumatizing.
That's crazy because we had that same discussion. Yeah.
Why do predominantly white schools do this? Why? They get the out of it.
Like it's the day I'm about to get off break. And we gonna talk about Christopher Columbus. I got so heated. I was going off. I was like,
I didn't even join the debate.
In America. Second of all, he raped and killed the women in wherever he was. What, India? Yeah.
Caribbean, yeah.
Yeah. And then
it's like I didn't even join the debate because I was just too angry. Because I knew if I was in that debate, I would have said something that would hurt someone's feelings, and then I would have been suspended. Because at the end, a girl said to the boys who was on Christopher Columbus was a villain, she said, "You are a cis white het male. You don't know what it's like to face oppression." And then there was me too. And it was just like, this class is not it's not a racially safe space. They don't, my class, like the teacher, she doesn't make it a safe space for students of color, because I think that she just really does not know how to deal with students of color.
Yeah, because when you go to when you go to predominantly white schools throughout your whole entire school career, from K to 12th grade, you're gonna like you're gonna hear things. You're either gonna take it in and believe what they're saying, or you're gonna oppose it. And a lot of people are being brainwashed by what kids are saying in their schools. Yeah. The word monkey in our school is used way too much. People know that, like, it's like my friends say kids call them monkeys. Like, it's like one kid keeps calling me a monkey. I'm like,
that reminds me of like freshman year. I wore my hair naturally a couple of weeks, and when I had my afro out, people would put staples in my hair, like in the back of my hair. I remember that because my grandma was here and she was doing my hair, and she was like, "Jersey, why are there staples in the back of your hair?" I was like, "I don't know, I didn't put that there."
It's almost like Black Lives Matter turned to like, it's just a joke. Like, people make it a joke. Like, I'll see people like in the hallway like this.
Mm-hmm. Like, yeah. Or that whole thing on TikTok where the first video, the original video was actually funny, and I was like, okay. But then when everybody started imitating him, where it was that white boy who would get on, he went on his knees and he put his fist up like in Black Lives Matter salute, and he was like, when I see the only black kid in my class, and like he like got on his knees and put his fist up. I was like, okay, that's actually really funny. It was unexpected. But then when everyone started imitating him and like just doing black objects, it was like, you ruined the joke. It's not funny.
Yeah, it's like the joke is there. It's funny to an extent.
Yeah, it's funny when the first person who did it, but then when everybody else started doing it, it's like it's not funny anymore. It's like they're making fun of us now.
Yeah, it's like like this is a serious thing that we take seriously, and you're making a joke out of it. It's they treat it like a trend.
We're talking about how Black women during enslavement would control the markets that were happening when they had to get food for slave owners. How my teacher, she said, these beautiful Black women, and it was like, yes, beautiful Black women, yes, but like you did not have to add the beautiful, because it was really random. But then this girl, she came up to me and she was like, you are a beautiful Black woman. I was like,
It's like, I feel like that's the same thing as saying you're beautiful for a Black girl.
Yeah, or when someone says like, oh my gosh, I'm fat, and then people are like, oh no, you're beautiful. Like, I didn't say I wasn't, just that I was fat.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's the same energy. Yeah. Okay, bye.
Bye.